Can you use domain amplification if you do not have a curse technique? Let's talk about that and a bunch of other anime-friendly questions from you guys. So first up, this question from Quinn. Can you use domain amplification if you don't have a curse technique? And to be honest with you, we don't know. There simply has not been enough information to glean that one way or the other, and it's never been explicitly addressed. So what's interesting is every character we've seen use domain amplification does have a curse technique, and not only that, every character we've seen use it has a domain expansion. So does that mean you have to have a curse technique or even have to have a domain expansion to use it? Not necessarily, but it is interesting that the only people we've seen do it are those people, right? So for my personal opinion, I don't see why you would have to have a curse technique to do it, or a domain for that matter, but I could really easily see why those people are the ones that have it. Because if you need to know what domain amplification is, I've got a full video breaking it down, but to put it very simply, it's a barrier technique that doesn't have anything in it. So what it's doing is it's kind of absorbing the curse technique it comes into contact with, aka negating it. This is why they're using it against Gojo to get past his limitless, right? So in order to have the understanding to craft a barrier that can do something like that, having the knowledge on how to create a domain expansion would be a great place to start, because you're already familiar with imbuing curse techniques into barriers to get the sure hit effect, right? So you're kind of doing that here, except instead of imbuing your curse technique, you're leaving it blank to absorb another one. So, all that to say is that these people that are so skilled that we see use this, maybe that's why. However, since you don't actually use a curse technique in the creation of it, I could see somebody without one being able to do it, so long as they were like a genius at jujutsu and could figure that type of stuff out without ever having practically done it themselves. Next up, we got a couple questions from All That's Found. The first is, does the fact that more characters can create positive energy now mean that curses are way weaker since it's so good on them? I'm not a manga reader, but it seems like at Sukuna's level, no spirit would be difficult to kill. So first off, you're correct. Like, no curse spirit can do absolutely anything to Sukuna. And that's true of basically all like the top tier people in the verse. There can obviously be some supremely powerful cursed spirits, but when we're talking about power levels with a sorcerer, there's just different levels to this, right? But what I'll say is, even though we have, characters being able to do reverse curse technique, aka create positive cursed energy that is so lethal against curses, I don't think curses are getting weaker. Yes, they're at a disadvantage when they come against somebody that can do that, but like on a grand scale, like in terms of the balance of the world, I don't think they're getting weaker. And if anything, if there was some sort of paradigm shift where, let's say, like every sorcerer got positive energy somehow, then if anything, I think curses would get stronger as like an evolutionary response to that, if that makes sense. And then to your second question on, do I think a cursed spirit could create positive energy? No, they can't, because it's like the antithesis to them, right? This is why positive energy is so good against them, because it's lethal to them. So if they were to create it, which positive cursed energy, reverse curse technique takes place in your brain, right? So they would like destroy their own brains if they started trying to do that process. And I know this isn't what you were asking, but since this is a common question I get a lot, people are like, well, wait, if curses can't do reverse curse technique, then how are they healing? And that's because curses heal with normal cursed energy, negative cursed energy. They don't have to perform reverse curse technique to heal, and that's because they're literally made up of cursed energy, right? So normal cursed energy can heal them. Next up, we got this question from Shaus on which curse technique is better, puppet manipulation or cursed corpses, aka Mekamaru's curse technique or Principal Yaga's, right? And I feel like we got to give some specifics here, because if we're talking about the curse techniques in general in a vacuum, then I'm going to go cursed corpses. But if we're talking like specifically Mekamaru versus Yaga, then I would probably lean Mekamaru just due to his heavenly restriction. Both of them obviously have crazy potential with the way they could kind of build up an army, right? Mekamaru, he has to control all of them, but like we know he's such a genius the way he could like essentially programmed an AI of himself, right? After he died, like I think he could not make fully autonomous, like conscious, self-aware robots, but he could still make an army that could pretty much rival like a real army, right? So if we combine that with his genius, with his heavenly restriction, I'm going puppet manipulation. But if we're just doing it again, like just the base level curse technique, and like I'm going to get access to one of these, then I'd probably take cursed corpses, because puppet manipulation, you really need kind of that heavenly restriction. Next up, I got this question from Christopher on if I could explain the different colors of cursed energy. So, little disclaimer before I get into this. Obviously, the manga is in black and white, right? So there often aren't any type of like distinct colors associated with things. Sometimes there are, and you can like infer that, but in general, it's black and white. So Mappa with the anime could just be taking their own creative liberties. Now, Gege maybe told them to do this, like, hey, maybe make this that color, maybe make it this color, but we don't know, right? So I would say for the most part, the colors you're seeing in various scenes are probably just in tune with the emotions. Like, cursed energy is typically shown as blue or some shade of blue, but then when somebody gets like really angry or has a rage moment, it becomes red. And then Black Flash is obviously black, right? So I would say there isn't really like a canonical hard answer for those types of things. It's generally just aesthetic and theme. And speaking of black flashes, I had a question from Anthony on if you could hit a black flash on an inanimate object, with the idea behind that being, could you theoretically, like in preparation for a battle, just throw punches like on a punching bag, let's say, trying to hit a black flash before you go into battle so that you get like that amp, that buff, and just go in at your max potential. And I would say conceptually, this should be possible, like theoretically, but the way we understand black flashes is that you have to be in the zone. You have to be in the flow state. So it would probably be really hard to like naturally reach that type of level in practice, if that makes sense. Is it impossible? No, but I would say, it's all about just really being in the moment, in the zone. I have a video on black flashes if you guys haven't seen that. I go into more depth there, but I compare it to like an athlete when they're just, in that flow state like I'm talking about. It'd be hard to imagine them doing that just like in a routine practice or a routine drill, right? So yeah, I'm getting long-winded, but possible, yes, but would it actually happen? I doubt it. It's probably got to be in the moment, in the battle type of thing. Next up, we got this question from Wilfredo on if Yuta Okotsu could copy Maharaga's adaptation ability. So here's what I'll say. If Maharaga's ability is considered a curse technique, then yes, this should be theoretically possible. There is some kind of discourse on what the requirements for Yuta might be in order to copy somebody's technique, but assuming it is one, then he could theoretically copy it. However, in my opinion, I would guess that Maharaga's ability isn't really a curse technique per se, and it's more so just an innate trait of him. Like that's just something that Shikigami comes paired with, if you will. But there's really never been a definitive statement on that. So it very well could be a curse technique as we understand it. And again, in that case, Okotsu could theoretically copy it. But again, in my opinion, no. Next up, we got this question from On Myoto. Pause and read the whole thing if you guys would like to, but it's basically about the same way Tengen set up the barriers across Japan to optimize cursed energy. Is it theoretically possible to do that for the entire world? And I made a video talking about the Tengen and the barriers thing, so if you need more information, check that out. But this is interesting. I mean, I do think it would be theoretically possible, but it would require either somebody with like a crazy heavenly restriction like Mekamaru, like you said. I don't think Mekamaru could do something like that on his own, but he could certainly be an important piece to making it happen. But ultimately, I think it would require collaboration between a bunch of sorcerers worldwide to like collectively create some barriers together. So I think it would be possible in that regard. And then you also mentioned like if somebody had a fate manipulation curse technique, then certainly, right? If somebody had some sort of ultra powerful reality manipulation or something like that, then they could do it that way as well. Next up, we got this question from Lamont who wants to know if binding vows could fail because the person isn't giving up enough. And certainly, because the whole principle behind binding vows is equivalent exchange. You got to give something up to get something else, right? And those things need to be roughly equal. For example, in Nanami's binding vow, where he gets more powerful if he works overtime, he gets that power boost because he's intentionally weaker during the day. So if Nanami was like, I want to be 1% weaker during the day to get 90% stronger at night, that wouldn't work because it's not equivalent. Next up, we got this question from A on the dimensional slash versus Might Guy's kick that bends space. And in this case, I think the slash wins because it basically ignores everything. So it wouldn't matter that, space was being bent around the kick. It's still going to get slashed. And last but not least, Ildi, I got your dono here, but I could not find the comment you're referring to. So I DM'd you on Instagram. Hit me back there and we can figure this out. And to everybody else, thank you so much for watching.